Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear listeners. I hope that you are all well. We're fine here in the UK, although very, very cold. I have not seen sunshine now in 2 weeks. It's overcast. It's absolutely freezing. Temperatures are between 1 and 2 Celsius through the day. So we've had this very awful grey cold spell. We're hoping that it would lift soon. But apparently this is one of the effects of climate change. Something that we all need to be aware of and be making our contribution towards reducing. But here we are in a very cold February still. Today I'm going to do something slightly different, which is that I'm going to read out a short piece that I came across recently by Professor Asma Barlas. As you know, I have quoted Asma Barlas on various occasions. I think she's one of the greatest female scholars of Islam, and has made amazing contributions, especially through her book Believing Women in Islam, where she reads the Qur'an, where she gives us an egalitarian reading of the Qur'an, and she challenges some patriarchal readings that we're also accustomed to. And I was really fortunate, actually. So last year in spring, she was here in the UK and she was holding a small seminar in the University of Bradford, or rather the Bradford Central Library. I think it was a library. So I got to meet her last spring and actually had some desi food with her, some very spicy desi food with her. She's in her early 70s, an absolutely lovely person, very humble, very soft-spoken. And she was telling me, and she was telling the group gathered there, that when she was launching her book and she was doing her book tour, on one particular occasion, when she said in introducing her book that her reading is inspired by the fact that Allah is unlike anything that we know. You know, his being is beyond human language, and that God is not a male God. And she was telling us that she was actually hissed at by the audience, and when her talk finished, a few men, as they were leaving the room, actually spat at her. So this is the kind of reaction that female scholars get. So female scholars challenging the power of patriarchy is actually doing a great service to the Muslim community, and they face horrendous consequences as well as a result of that. But this piece I'm going to read from her, it's a very short piece, and it came out roughly at the same time, just after her book was released. And here she's asking some important questions. And the main question she's asking is if only men have the right, the exclusive right to interpret the Quran. So as I read it out, please do listen to the questions and the arguments that she's posing. But there is also a very interesting little incident in there, which is about this idea that a question that is posed about when would the Muslim community accept women as knowledgeable readers of the Quran. So it's really interesting. So please do pay attention to this, do listen to it. I will include a link to the article in the description of the video as well, so you can read it in your own time. And also if you want to bookmark it and save it and come back to the piece. So let me make a start in reading it. This was published in Open Democracy, opendemocracy.net, and the piece is titled, Do Men Have the Exclusive Right to Interpret the Quran? So Asma Barlas is writing this piece, and this is what she says, some very important things that she mentions. Several years ago, Muslim students of the Avicenna Society of Rotterdam organized a debate between Tariq Ramadan and myself about the status of Muslims in the West. I have to pause here and say that Tariq Ramadan has since become a highly controversial person. I'll continue now. In speaking about the discrimination and violence of Muslim women, Muslim women have suffered in the name of Islam, I pointed out that the Quran actually affirms their equality with men. It does so by teaching that God created both from the same self, nafs, made them vice-regents, khalifa, on earth, and appointed them one another's guides and guardians, awliya, with the mutual obligation to enjoin the right and forbid the wrong. Yet there is no trace of these verses in dominant interpretations of the Quran or in Muslim law. Instead, both law and exegesis foreground a handful of verses or lines, less than 6 out of more than 6,000 verses, that they take as advocating male supremacy over women. My larger point was to question why Muslims invest only men with the authority to interpret the Qur'an and why they are averse to interpreting it differently than they do. I have read it as an egalitarian and anti-patriarchal text in my book Believing Women in Islam, Unreading Patriarchal Interpretation of the Qur'an. At the end of the debate, several women in the audience asked Ramadan what he thought about women's readings of the Quran. Women, he eventually said, had to achieve a certain mastery in order to be able to comment on it knowledgeably. All these years later, I can still recall the incensed face of a young woman in hijab who was repeatedly pushing him to clarify just how many more centuries he felt women had to wait before men would regard them as being knowledgeable. He did not say. The truth is that the Quran doesn't authorize only men or a scholarly community to interpret it, and nor is there an ordained clergy or church in Islam. Nor does the Quran say it came only for the literate. To the contrary, it says it is meant also for the unlettered Bedouins in the deserts of Arabia. In a remarkably post-Reformation vein, it insists that believers should have a direct relationship with God and should rely on our own reason and intelligence to decipher its verses, its ayat or signs of God. Yet, in the millennium and a half since Islam's advent, only men and only Arabic-speaking men have interpreted its religious texts, at least publicly. Even among liberal and progressive Muslims today, men remain the locus of authority, as Ramadan's comment made very clear. Arguably, on this score, Muslims may be no different from Jews and Christians and adherents of other faiths whose religious texts were also revealed or authored in patriarchies. Patriarchy, a form of institutionalized male supremacy, is older than Islam, and its history is rather sordid when it comes to women's welfare. It is this overlapping trajectory of religion and patriarchy that has prompted some feminists to dub Islam a religious patriarchy and to declare that patriarchy has God on its side. Here she is quoting Kate Millett from Sexual Politics, dated 1970. God on its side. I don't doubt that when religious traditions represent and misrepresent God as male, they empower men. But what if a scripture refutes the idea that God is a male or indeed comparable to any created being? What if, as the Quran asserts, God is beyond the highest evolved thought of human beings, utterly unique, utterly unlike anything that exists? Would such an unsexed, ungendered God have an investment in propping up the authority of human males? Why on earth? Given such descriptions of God in the Quran, I can't understand why Muslims treat God as a male. True, the Quran calls God He, but we can see this as a function of Arabic, the language in which it was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in 7th century Arabia. The Quran itself states that it is in Arabic because God wished to address the Arabs in their own language. And while most Muslims have come to view Arabic itself as a sacred language, the Quran doesn't intimate that it is. The reason why such seemingly esoteric issues are important to a discussion of women's rights is because if God is not a male, there is no reason for men to claim a special affinity with God as a way to then exercise totalizing authority over women. In fact, positing such an affinity and claiming this kind of authority borders on shirk, a derogation of divine sovereignty. The argument is simple enough. In Islam, we have an absolute God whose oneness and sovereignty are indivisible, meaning no one can participate in or partake of God's encompassing dominion over everyone and everything. Yet, in many Muslim societies, men posture as earthly gods over women, all in the name of following Islam. To be clear, I'm not opposed to men interpreting the Quran. Far from it. My own understanding of it has been shaped solely by men's interpretations and translations. The most compelling to me is by Muhammad Asad, who was born a Jew in Austria-Hungary at the turn of the 20th century and converted to Islam when he was 26. Another favorite translation is by the noted Shia scholar Abdullah Yusuf Ali. I also don't think, like many feminists do, that we need communities of women readers to generate liberatory interpretations of texts. Hundreds of years of women's following in men's footsteps, voluntary or not, should dispel this illusion. Having said this, though, I believe that the questions women and men bring into our reading of sacred texts are likely to differ. Women who have a stake in challenging the deification of men could very well ask whether the Qur'an endorses patriarchy, which is what I do at the start of my own reading. And I define patriarchy as both rule by the father or the husband, and as a politics of sexual differentiation that privileges men because they are male. To my surprise and relief, I find that the Qur'an doesn't endorse either mode of patriarchy, and to the contrary, criticizes the mindless rush to follow the ways of the fathers who were and are devoid of knowledge. In the years since the debate with Ramadan, I have shared my reading with many young Muslims who are looking to encounter the divine. To them, what matters isn't whether someone has the authority to interpret the Quran or not, but what they have to say about it. At such times, I'm reminded that when we treat the Quran as simply a manifesto for claiming rights or for meting out punishments, we forget that before anything else, it is a way for us to know the Creator we are called on to worship. So some profound thoughts here that I'm going to leave with you. I do have one little bit of critique for this piece. I think that Asma Barlas, the extent of resistance and difficulty that she's seen, there is some cynicism creeping in here, because she says that many feminists think that we need communities of women readers to generate liberatory interpretations of the text. She does not agree with that. She responds by saying, well, hundreds of years of women's following in men's footsteps should dispel this illusion. So she does not have much hope and optimism for that. And this is where I differ. In my view, I actually have huge amounts of hope and optimism. I think women are generating liberatory readings of the Quran. I think many women's readings, in terms of their orientation towards justice and ethics, is closer to the wisdom and the hikmah of the Quran. And I am very hopeful that, somebody like me who is still learning, still researching, that I would like to inspire women and to open up that space where they feel empowered to approach the Quran on their own. And together we will generate beautiful, emancipatory and liberatory readings of the Quran. So much here to ponder on. I shall leave you with this beautiful piece, much to reflect on. I hope that you find this short video really beneficial, and I hope that you also find it quite uplifting to see that there are fantastic, knowledgeable, hugely competent Muslim female scholars who are doing some incredible work in the field of Islamic studies. Thank you very much once again for listening to me, and Assalamu alaikum.